Everybody loves trees, but making them prettier, better, bigger is a challenge. They bend in weird ways, they have strange shapes, they just don't follow strict rules. So what's the secret? What's the process behind them? We've already seen how to make small or more like medium scale trees in a previous video. So today I'm gonna walk you through the process of making these large mega trees. We are gonna go step by step so that you can build your own crazy, epic and unique trees. First things first, Axiom. Axiom is a mod for Minecraft Java that allows us to build better and faster. Whenever builds get to the large mega scale, we need to begin using tools like these to speed up the process. Today we will be relying heavily on Axiom, so if you don't know what Axiom is or how to install it or use it, here I will leave you a link to a more basic and complete tutorial. Without further ado, let's dive into the trees. First we are going to work on the trunk and branches, for which we are going to be using the path tool. This tool works in a very simple way. When we click on the ground, we will be adding points to our path, and that will create a line or a curve connecting each point. The block that it will use is this one, the active block, which we can change to something like diamond blocks, for instance. Now to make the trunk with this tool, we need to add points in a vertical line. The most effective way of doing this is by pressing E on the keyboard between each point. That way, the tool will allow us to place points mid-air and create a somewhat vertical line. And then we can adjust each point individually. Once we have the line, we need to make it thicker, for which we can increase the radius of the path. If we want, we can also click each point, check the box Override Radius, and that way modify the size of the points individually to make something that gets thinner towards the top or thicker at the bottom. Once we are happy with the shape, we must press Enter to place it in the world. Those are the basics of the path tool. If you are new to it, I recommend taking some time to practice it, because it is essential for making large trees. The main advantage of going large scale is that we can add a ton of details and create crazier shapes. However, the most difficult thing when working on a large scale is knowing what to do. So what I recommend is grabbing a reference image and work from that. In our case, we will use this large oak tree as a reference. If we take a closer look at the trunk of this tree, we can see that it seems to be made of smaller trees all attached together. We can use this as inspiration. We can add more smaller paths going on the sides just like this, to resemble those smaller trees or big roots coming around. Adding paths on top of paths is a very quick and easy way of creating a realistic looking trunk. We are basically going around adding smaller paths to change the shape until we end up with something that looks how we want it to look. Allow yourself to have fun with it and remember that it doesn't need to be perfect. Once we like the rough shape, we can go in by hand and polish some areas. Mostly where there are single blocks or single block holes, it's good to get rid of them as they just add unnecessary noise. Two more useful tools that can help with the shape are the melt and smooth tools. We can first set a tool mask to target only the diamond blocks, and now slowly melt some areas of the trunk to modify the shape where we need to. And the smooth tool can also help to quickly smooth areas that may have too much noise. But be careful not to overdo it, as sometimes it's nice if it looks rough. We can use this method to create other types of trees as well. If we take advantage of the curve created by the path, we can easily make a bonsai shape for a tree, where the trunk curves in more weird ways. Then again, we add more details with smaller paths and end up with something like this. Or we can also create a more mangrove swamp looking tree, with a bunch of messy roots coming down to the ground. The limit is really your imagination or the reference picture that inspires your tree. Here I've been using a radius between 3 or 4 for the trunk, but we can also increase it and go crazier with the scale. Let's say we do a radius of 6, this one will take a bit more time as it's larger, but the method is exactly the same. We just add more paths around the main trunk to make our tree look more realistic. We can melt some areas as well and end up with something like this. This took me under 20 minutes, and we managed to create 4 different trunk shapes for our trees. For the branches, we are going to apply the same principle that we used for the smaller trees in the previous video, which is layering, but in a slightly different way. Depending on the scale of our tree, we can work on 2, 3 or 4 layers for branches. More than that is not necessary. For the first layer with the path tool again, we are going to choose a smaller radius and begin creating a smaller branch coming out. Here we can make use of the reference image to guide the size and inclination of this branch. But if you don't have a reference, a good rule is to make the branches feel as if the trunk was splitting up a few times. So we can have 2 branches of roughly half the size of the trunk each one, or 3 with a size a bit smaller than that, or 4 branches, and so on. You get the point. This is not a strict rule, and especially on a larger scale you are free to play around and make more random decisions. But if you don't know where to start, this rule is a solid point to fall back to every time. The same applies to all the other trees. These are a bit smaller, so we must go smaller, and for the mega one we must go with bigger branches, and because they are bigger we can treat them in a similar way to the trunk and add more details to their shapes by adding more smaller paths around them. Now for the second layer we will do a similar process with a smaller radius and also this time with a different block, in my case gold blocks. We are going to begin adding branches in different directions coming out from the tips of the big ones. Sometimes though we can add some coming out from other places like halfway through the branch. The key here is to try and cover the entire tree all around to make sure that there aren't many large empty areas. Something like that. Once we have that, we are going to go with the third and final layer for this tree, where we will use the path tool with a radius of 0. This is the thinnest path possible and we are going to use it to make a bunch of small branches coming out in all directions. Most of the time they will follow the flow of the original branch, but sometimes they will go in random directions. This step is the one that takes the longest for the branches, but I personally like doing this step because here is where I sort of get an idea of how the tree is going to end up looking. And that way we can see that the shape of the tree is coming together. The shapes done with the path tool are pretty good, and they work wonderful at this scale. However, it's not a bad idea to smooth them up a bit by using smaller blocks like stairs, slabs, walls, glass panes and trapdoors. We can use this progression to smooth vertically or this other one to smooth horizontally. It's a process that takes time, practice, patience, and honestly it's very optional. I will do it so you can see and compare side by side the difference between one with and without smoothing. At a scale like this one, I'd say it's worth doing at least some smoothing on the trunk. But again, doing it or not is completely up to you. Now comes the fun part, the leaves, to make the canopy. For the smaller trees on the previous video, we described 2 possible methods to create a canopy. The outline method and the blob method. The outline method consists of drawing the canopy of our tree and then filling it in. You can imagine that at this larger scale of trees, this method would take forever. That doesn't mean that it won't work, it just won't be the most efficient, so I don't recommend it at this scale. The blob method on the other hand, this one is more powerful. But how do we create the blobs? I like to use 2 different techniques for that. The first are the Metaball shapes. If we go to the shape tool, we can choose line wool and check on the box that says Metaball. We can see how the sphere will begin to flatten down as we move it closer to the flat surface on the ground, creating this sort of lenticular shape. We can do a couple blobs with this, modifying other parameters like the size, the range, and the shape itself. With this, we will create a couple different leaf assets, which then we are going to select with the magic select tool. Here we can turn off the down option and also turn on the surface option. So if we select and copy a blob with Ctrl+C, we can see that it will only copy the top shell of the blob. Then we can come to our tree and press Ctrl+V to paste it in between the top of the blue branches. If we paste all the blocks like this, you can quickly realize that they will all look very similar because they have the same orientation. That's not necessarily bad, some trees work when having a repeating pattern like that, but in our case I want more variation because I want it to look more realistic. So what we can do is while the blob is in the holographic form, we can click the option here on the top right corner that says Unlock Rotation. This will allow us to rotate the blob by dragging the handles in different orientations more freely, and that way adapt each blob to fit our tree. This is by far my favorite method as it allows me to have more control over the shape of the canopy, while at the same time it doesn't take a lot of time. In general, I like to rotate the blobs that are on the sides, and as we get to the top we just keep them flat, which creates some sort of pyramid-like canopy. If we compare the two side by side, we can agree, I think, that the second one looks way more realistic. The second technique makes use of the stamp tool. A lenticular shape is not always what we are looking for our tree. Sometimes we need something more specific. So for instance, we can design a couple different blob shapes by hand. And in this case, I will use 3 colors of wool to make each blob have a bit of a different gradient already in them, going from red to yellow. Once we have those, we can select one of them, copy it, and then in the stamp tool we can press Add Clipboard. That will add the blob we just copied to the tool. Then we can do the same for all the other blobs that we want to use. With all of them loaded, we can begin clicking with this tool around the branches to start adding the leaves all around. For the placement, we have 2 options: immediate, which is the default, and single, which is a bit more useful when we want to have a bit more control on where exactly we place each blob. If you don't care too much and want to go faster, just use the default mode and click to add leaves all around. We can also play around with the direction. The default will place on top of blocks, but we can change it to place at the bottom, or to the north, or south, or the other directions. This is useful when we need to begin filling in more gaps on our tree. You can clearly see how we end up with a very different canopy, not only in shape but also in color, since now this one already has a gradient built into it that we can use later. As an extra mention, you could also make the blobs directly using the shape tool. Here, if we turn on the option Instant Place, we can visualize where we are placing each blob. Also, with the cutoff parameter, we can cut the shapes in half by playing with the percentages. We can make them hollow and play around with the size parameters to get very stylized looking trees. The blob method is great and it's my favorite, but there is one other method that is way faster and works quite well at this scale for trees. Let me show you. If we go to the tool mask, then edit, we can then set some conditions for the rest of the tools to work. What we want is to paint the blocks of air that are around or in close proximity to the lapis branches, because that's where we want to have the leaves. So we can set up a tool mask like this. We bring the AND option up here, and inside we place block equal air and near equal lapis block. This one is the tool mask that we need, and it's basically saying only affect blocks of air that are near lapis blocks. How near? Well, we can change that by modifying the radius. So if we do a radius of 2 and then paint with lime wool, we can see how it's going to work. As we increase the radius, the canopy will begin to have a better, more full shape. This is by far the fastest method, but it comes at the expense of having very little control over the shape. It will highly depend on where and how you made the small branches. But on trees with massive scales like this one, it's a really good option to save some time. When using these leaf methods, sometimes the canopy can end up looking a bit empty and sparse, or it can end up looking like a bunch of spheres pasted together. So once we have a basic shape for the canopy, there are a couple of tricks that we can use to adapt it, fix it, adjust it, basically to make sure that it looks the way that we want it to look. I prepared a bunch of copies of this tree, and we are going to go down the list of 7 different tricks to adapt the canopy. 1. Painting the canopy with a noise painter to add air. We must set a tool mask first to target lime wool, and then on the noise painter we check anisotropic and choose the splatter noise pattern. Modify the sizes until you get something that you like, and on the blocks we choose air. So then when we paint, this will add random patches of air in between the leaves. 2. Offsetting the canopy a couple times and painting with air in between. We first select the entire canopy. We duplicate it by pressing here or Ctrl-J on the keyboard, and then we move the canopy 1 or 2 blocks up and a bit to the side. Then click on Paste Copy. Then we can add another one a bit down and to the other side. This will help make the canopy look a bit larger and better. Then of course we can paint with air in between as well. 3. Copying the entire canopy and scaling it down. We first select the entire canopy again, duplicate it with Ctrl-J, and click here where it says Rotate/Scale. Choose the nearest neighbor's interpolation, and here we can change the scale in every direction, and press Scale. That will make a smaller version of the canopy that we can then use as a bigger blob to readapt the shape. And finally, we paint with air again in between. 4. Using a near tool mask to fluff it up all around. If we go to the tool mask, we can set an AND logic with block equal air and near equal lime. So then if we paint with a noise painter, we can add bits of lime wool all around to fluff up the canopy in every direction. 5. Using a below tool mask to add random fluffiness at the top. Another tool mask that we can use is the below mask. If we set below equal lime, we will paint only on top of the lime wool. 6. Using an above mask to add hanging down vines. Similarly, we can use above equal lime, and this will paint only underneath the lime wool. If we use this a couple times, randomizing the seed of the noise painter in between, we can quickly create this effect of hanging vines from our tree. 7. Using an above and below tool mask to add shadows and highlights. Lastly, we can use both an above and a below mask, and paint with green to create a shadow underneath the tree, and paint with yellow to create a highlight on top of the lime. That of course later on we will replace for other blocks. You don't need to use these tricks individually, we can of course combine them and mix them together to make sure that our tree is looking exactly how we want it to look. For example, on the mega tree, I will scale down the canopy to use it as a big blob that I can paste around and modify the shape. Then I will paint with air all around, repeating a couple times until the spheres are broken down. Then we can use a below tool mask to add some highlights at the top, a bit on a diagonal as well, and finally an above tool mask to add some shadows in the opposite direction, plus some bits dripping down like vines as well. So that way, combining the tricks, we can quickly arrive at something that looks so much better and realistic than the spheres that we had before. For the trunk and branches, there's no need to make things overcomplicated. I'll do it on this separate version to show you, but you can do it directly on the tree with leaves. The easiest is to just choose a wood type and replace the diamond blocks with that just by dragging the block in. The only thing that you need to consider is when using stairs, slabs and walls to make sure that you grab a block that has a similar color variant of those. To change that quickly, we can select the entire trunk and go to the top where it says Operations, type Replace. Here we will choose Prismarine on the left and Matte Bricks on the right. So when we click Replace, it will change all the Prismarine for the matte variants and preserve their orientations. Then we can do the same for the gold branches and the endstone that we use for detailing. Let's change the gold to oak wood and the endstone we type replace it to matte. And then we repeat for the lapis. Another palette for the trunk could be using acacia and tuff that will give us a grey looking tree, or a white one using birch, diorite, calcite, pale wood and so on. Now if you don't want a single color, you can use the operation autoshade from here to automatically paint the trunk with a gradient that resembles a light hitting the tree from a side. However, you can only do this on the full blocks of the tree, but the prismarine and endstone needs to be changed by hand, and we can do that easily following the guidance of the blocks we have nearby. This will take a bit more time, but the result will be more realistic. There are way more options for painting with Axiom, so here's a video I made on that in case you need more assistance with it. Let's start with this one where we color-coded the highlights and shadows with yellow and green respectively. A classic palette for tree leaves is going with oak leaves in the middle, azalea for the highlights, and birch for the shadows. So we will replace the lime wool with oak, the yellow with azalea, and the green shadows with birch. If you didn't do the color coding with highlights and shadows, like in this tree for instance, we can use the painter tool in gradient mode to create that illusion of highlights and shadows. Here we can select the same small gradient of 3 leaves, and with the tool mask to only target the lime wool, we can paint. Here the gradient will be applied depending on the size of our brush, with the highlights in the middle and the shadows on the edge. The effect that we can get with this is really cool. Now the real magic of working on a tree of this scale is that we don't necessarily need to use leaf blocks for the leaves, since most likely we will be looking at these trees from far away, and at a certain distance the blocks just become a pixel of color and we lose their texture. So nothing stops us from painting a jacaranda tree by mixing different purple blocks in a gradient, or a whimsical golden tree, or a white one, or red, or really anything that you can think of. Like in this case, where we already had a gradient, we can choose 3 cyan blue colors for a fantasy looking tree. Just play around and create your own masterpiece. With what we have so far, it will be more than good to create amazing looking trees. Now, if you want to go that extra step, I will show you a few tricks that are perhaps a bit more complex, but that will make your trees go from awesome to very awesome. We've talked about adding movement to the trees on the previous videos, and I showed you how to do that by hand. Of course, you can imagine that doing that here at this scale would take ages. So how do we add movement to our trees using Axiom? On the tool mask menu there's one called Offset, and it is, in my opinion, the most difficult to use and understand, but also the most powerful. This mask will offset whatever condition we put inside a number of blocks in each direction, which are these 3 numbers right here. So how do we use this to add movement? Let's go to the mega tree as an example. What we want to add is a reduced amount of leaves and smaller particles with air in between. And I want them all to be flowing in a certain direction. So basically they all need to create some sort of diagonal line. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it needs to make sense and communicate to whoever is looking at it that the wind is blowing in a specific direction. So inside the offset tool mask we will place block equal green wool, and then we will change the offset numbers. On the vertical I will put a 1, and on the seed, which is the last one, I will put a 2. So now when we paint, the tool will search for any block of green wool and paint 1 block down and 2 to the left. But we also want to make sure that we are only replacing air blocks. So we need to bring an AND condition, place the offset inside, and add block equal air on top. That way the offset mask still works, but exclusively on air blocks. Once we have this, we can just paint over and over. I recommend doing this with a noise painter, with a splatter pattern or a white pattern, and also play around with the numbers of the offsets as you move along. We can increase it to 3 instead of 2 as we move further apart, reduce the percentages of blocks to add in the noise painter, and honestly don't be afraid of messing it up, just make a few copies, try a few times, and have fun with it. In this case I went a bit too crazy with the amount, that's fine, it can happen, so with the noise painter I will get rid of some of them by painting with air, trying to accentuate the diagonal lines. Once we have something that we like, we can also assist the movement using the path tool. We can create some rough flowing lines going down all around the tree, something that accompanies the movement of the tree. Once we have all that movement in place, we need to paint it. I will show you what I like to do most of the time, which is using candles of different sizes and a bit of glass and glass paints. So first we will tool mask the block that we used for the flowing lines, in my case magenta wool. Then over the noise painter we will select a mix of candles. Here we can right click on them and drag the slider all the way across to randomize the number of candles, or if you want to have a bit more control, you can add the same candle 4 times and modify the amount manually. Mix in some air and glass paints in between, and just paint over the wool. As you can see, this is very powerful and the only limit is your imagination. If you are allowed to use illegal blocks, then you can have floating vegetation. We can use a below mask, for instance, to add grass on top of the tree, or add a glass color above to create a highlight, or using an above mask to accentuate the shadows with black or tinted glass. I could go on forever with different tricks and combinations that we can use to achieve cool effects, but I believe that with what we've seen so far, it's more than enough for you to find what works best for you and your trees. So I hope you found this tutorial useful and that now you can decorate your worlds with a bunch of colorful, epic mega trees. If you can, don't forget to leave a like. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Calvin and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.